Hi, my name's Phil. I like to come out politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss an article on Britons who are homeless in Spain, unable to find work, and mostly because of Brexit. And if you read the article without knowing who wrote it, you come away, you might be lamenting the damage that Brexit has done to ordinary people's lives, or maybe heartened by the way that these people have come together to form a little community. But this article is in the Daily Mail, who not only promoted Brexit, but aggressively targeted anyone who dared point out the damage it would cause, including in this particular case. You're actually wondering if they're publishing the article to boast about the hurts they've caused ordinary people, effectively laughing at their own readers. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So this article centres on the plight of a British woman called Jodie, who was living happily in Benidorm until Brexit left her unable to work. Now, I did a video a few years ago about how lots of Brits living in Spain would have been able to carry on, no problems, but they needed to apply for settled status as part of the withdrawal agreement. So part of that agreement, EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU, if they'd already been living there, they'd been able to move there as part of freedom of movement, would be able to apply to carry on there. But you needed to know you needed to do that. But because neither the UK government nor the British media, including the Daily Mail, bothered to alert people to this, lots of British immigrants in Europe just assumed life would carry on as normal and were a little bit surprised when it turns out that was not the case. What do you mean I've been deported? And the reason nobody bothered to warn them is because the Tories and their client media were all desperate to avoid anyone realising just what a massive change Brexit would be. Because there was this double think going on amongst people who were supporting Brexit. On the one hand, it might bring all these brilliant benefits, but on the other hand, it wouldn't really change very much, right? That was the double think the Brexiteers needed people to believe. EU countries which deal with lots of British trade, they were building systems and facilities up for years, like the Netherlands and France, for example, to get ready. But the UK, which was actually going to see the biggest upheaval, didn't even begin to build the lorry parks until we'd actually left the EU. That came as a surprise to the people in Kent. The public simply weren't allowed to see any preparations for Brexit because that would give the game away that actually this was quite a big deal and was going to change a lot. But it also meant lots of British immigrants didn't realise they needed to do something if they wanted to carry on living in the EU afterwards. And without trying to stereotype, let's be honest, not only is there a large British immigrant population in Spain, but they have a bit of a reputation. Yes, there's the Remain in Spain group, so there are quite a few who were wise to Brexit years ago, but by and large, the type of Brit attracted to life in Spain, let's be honest, tends to be someone who reads the Daily Mail and the Sun, who thought that Brexit would be great and just didn't see that maybe it might be a problem for them. Because this is the problem with calling yourself an expat instead of an immigrant. You don't really think of it in those terms. It was like, oh, Brexit, that'll sort out all the immigrants. Aren't we immigrants? No, we're expats. They moved to Spain thanks to their EU membership and didn't think that that might be a problem when their passport was no longer an EU passport. I'll leave it to you to consider the state of their sun-dried intellects on that one. But as James O'Brien says, compassion for the conned, contempt for the con men. So Jodie and others found themselves in 2020 unable to either work, and they couldn't rent because the rents were just becoming too expensive. And the Mail article even points out that this was because of Brexit. So they don't just say, oh, something happened in 2020. We're not quite sure what it was. No, they say it's because of Brexit, which is what makes me think they're having a laugh. But then there's the next bit where the Daily Mail seemed to switch from boasting into rank hypocrisy. So the article explains how Jodie formed a little community with other people who were homeless in the area, which included native Spaniards, but also Albanians. And the article talks about how she built this community up and how a local charity helps them out. They even mention like a British Army veteran who's homeless in Benidorm himself, but, in his case, it's purely a cost of living issue. He says he lost his papers, right? So that's caused him some grief. Some of the homeless people do have jobs, presumably having had the foresight to apply for settled status, but still can't afford the rents, which have increased due to tourism in the area. It was actually quite funny to see the very last line of the article, like this is the closing statement in the article in the Mail, attacking the way tourism is harming locals in a Spanish town where loads of British tourists flock. But then something else occurred to me. So this article, if you read it, It's very sympathetic to the homeless Brits in Benidorm. Incredibly, it doesn't even refer to them as expats, doesn't refer to them as immigrants either, illegal or otherwise. But I got to thinking, let's say the reverse was true. As in, let's say this was happening in Britain, because it easily could. Okay, sure, we don't have the tourist hotspots like Benidorm driving up prices. Like our former coastal tourist towns are actually not doing that great by and large, which is why they're hotbeds of activity for Reform UK. But imagine there was a community of homeless people, which included Spaniards and Albanians in Britain. They can't work, they can't afford to rent. There was a British charity helping them out with food and other essentials. How would the Daily Mail report on that? I think it'd be on their front page. Would it be sympathetically in the same way they're reporting this community in Spain? No. They would be raging about an invasion, about illegal immigrants. They would target the charity helping them, just like they tried to target the RNLI for rescuing refugees. Because your mind goes all over the place reading this article. On the one hand, it's actually raising the harm caused by a combination of Brexit and the inequalities caused by the cost of living crisis later in the article, which are two massive social problems caused by the very greed that the people who own the Daily Mail and whom the Mail persuades their readers to vote for caused. You feel sorry for and admire Jodie for bringing people together who face common hardships, but then you also remember this is being written by the Daily Mail. You think about the motivation and can only imagine they must be doing it to gloat. They must be having a good laugh about it in the office. And then also realise that their readers will have sympathy for these homeless Brits in the piece purely out of nativist tribal feelings. And that if you gave those same people the article with just a few little details changed, like make the camp in Britain. Jodie's not British, right? She's like Belgian or something, right? I think they'd feel very different, don't you? Deport them, they'd be saying. Deport them. Particularly if Jodie was a bloke. Belgian bloke. Albanian bloke. Oh, that'd be much worse. If you said they'd been living here for years and it was Brexit that screwed them from being able to find work, for example, they would say, good, that's what we voted for. Kick them all out. In fact, if I were teaching critical thinking to Gammas, you know what? I'd save this article. I think I could use this article. I'd produce a version that moves it from Benidorm to Bognor, right? Change a few of the details to turn the Brits into, non-Brits. Doesn't really matter from which country. Give the real article to half the group and then get them to say what they think about it. Give the amended article to the other group, get them to say what they think about it. I bet you'd have some interesting results. In fact, it would be quite interesting to discuss this story in general terms with a Reform UK supporter. You could say, I read this thing in the Daily Mail. It was about this group of homeless people, right? Mostly immigrants who got completely shafted by Brexit and they've banded together in this nice little community. Isn't it nice? And you watch their faces turn to anger. You just watch them turn red. And then you tell them, oh, this is a story about British immigrants in Spain. And just watch the confusion on their face as they try and work out whether they're mad or not. Ask them if they think British people should be deported from where they've been living for years and years. I might give it a go the next time I get an opportunity. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.